English Easy Podcast.
Hello, learners. Welcome back to English Easy Podcast, your partner to learning English. Today, we are jumping into a deep dive on something that is probably happening in your head right now. Like literally right this very second.
Yeah, I'd say it's almost definitely happening right now.
Right. Most people are going to process, something like 50,000 words today. You're going to read emails, listen to us talk, maybe chat with your colleagues or your family. But the most brutal, just totally unforgiving conversation you will have all day. It's not going to be with a demanding boss or an angry client.
Not at all.
It's the one happening entirely inside your own skull.
Exactly. We spend our entire lives with this internal narrator, and, it is rarely a quiet roommate.
Rarely.
What's truly fascinating, though, especially when you start looking into the psychology of self-talk, is how fundamentally harsh that narrator is actually designed to be. I mean, it's a feature of human biology, not a bug.
And that biological reality is exactly what we want to unpack today. So our source material for this deep dive is incredibly revealing. It's based on research originally aimed at people learning English as a second language, focusing on how to discipline your thinking when you're trying to master something highly vulnerable.
Right, because language learning is just inherently vulnerable.
It is. But as you look at these insights, it becomes so clear that this psychology applies to absolutely anyone. I mean, if you are a young professional managing a new team, trying to speak up in a boardroom, or just, attempting to get through a high-stress Tuesday at the office, the mental barriers are identical.
Yeah, the mechanisms of self-doubt are entirely universal. When someone is learning a new language, their vulnerabilities are just pushed to the absolute surface.
Right.
Because they are forced to make mistakes out loud in real time in front of other people.
Which is terrifying.
Exactly. But those exact same internal alarm bells ring for all of us whenever we face uncertainty or risk social judgment.
And the source introduces this central metaphor to explain this, which I honestly haven't been able to stop thinking about. It suggests that the human mind is not just this single unified voice. It's actually way more like a chaotic 2 a.m. group chat.
Oh, the 2 a.m. group chat, such a perfect analogy.
You're right. It has zero filter, 200 unread messages, and a very specific cast of characters. So you have the coach, who is trying to be pragmatic and encouraging. You have the grandma, who is just constantly worried about your safety.
Did you eat enough?
Are you warm enough? Exactly. Then you have the drama queen, who is sending 10 panic emojis because someone looked at you weirdly in the hallway. And then most notoriously, you have the bully.
Yeah, and the bully is almost always the loudest participant in that chat.
Always. So the mission for our deep dive today is to really deconstruct why that specific voice completely dominates the conversation. We need to understand the cognitive mechanisms that give the bully so much power, and more importantly, how we can practically rewire the brain so the coach eventually speaks louder.
Right, because we aren't trying to destroy the mind's group chat.
Right.
I mean, that's biologically impossible anyway. We're just looking at how to shift the balance of power.
Exactly. So to shift that balance, we first have to figure out where the bully actually attacks. If we want to turn the volume down, we need to know the favorite battlegrounds. And the source points out something really interesting. We shouldn't be looking for these dramatic, movie-level moments of crisis.
No, the bully actually thrives in the completely mundane, boring moments of daily life.
Right. So the source breaks this down into 3 specific scenarios. Let's look at the first one. This happens in a class or a meeting. Imagine your manager, or maybe an instructor, asks a question to the room. Instantly, the answer pops into your head.
You just know it.
You know it. In the source's example, the English learner knows the grammatical answer is present perfect. And for one tiny fraction of a second, you actually feel confident. You literally take a breath to speak.
But in that microscopic window between having the thought and actually opening your mouth, the bully just completely hijacks the process. It doesn't offer a gentle warning. It screams at you, what if you say it wrong and look stupid? Everyone in this room is going to think you're completely incompetent.
And you feel that physical hesitation, like you actually swallow the words, you stay quiet. To everyone else in the room, you just look reserved or maybe a bit shy. But internally, you just lost a massive fight.
You lost because your brain basically equated speaking up with a literal survival threat.
Wait, really? A survival threat?
Yeah, we have to look at the evolutionary biology here. To our ancient hunter-gatherer brains, social rejection meant banishment from the tribe. And banishment meant physical death, either by starvation or predators.
Oh, okay.
So when the bully tells you not to speak in that meeting, your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, is firing the exact same alarm it would if you were standing in front of a wild animal.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that means the bully is fundamentally acting like a hyper-vigilant, completely rogue bodyguard.
That's a great way to put it.
It sees a minor social risk and treats it like a life or death situation, which I guess makes sense for the meeting room because there's public exposure there. People are looking at you. But that doesn't explain the second scenario, the source highlights.
The smartphone scenario.
Yes. Sitting entirely alone, just looking at your phone, you're typing a message to a manager or a teacher, someone whose opinion you really care about. You type in a perfectly fine sentence, but before your thumb can hit send, the bully whispers, "Who do you think you are? Your grammar is terrible. They are going to judge you."
Right, because the physical presence of the tribe isn't even required anymore. The mere anticipation of judgment is enough to trigger that same biological alarm. I mean, the source notes how incredibly common it is for people to record and delete a simple voice note 3 or 4 times.
Just agonizing over a single syllable. It is so taxing. Which naturally brings us to the third battleground. This happens when you are finally just exhausted from all this hiding all day. You're in bed at night, lying in the dark, and your brain decides this is the optimal time to play a high-definition highlight reel of all your mistakes.
Yes. The midnight review.
The midnight review, it's the worst.
Your mind just cycles through this entire catalog of perceived failures.
Oh.
Why did you phrase that email so awkwardly? Or why didn't you speak up when you knew the answer?
Okay, wait. We have to pause here because there is a massive contradiction happening. During the day, my internal bodyguard is telling me, don't speak, stay safe, avoid the embarrassment. It actively forces me to be quiet to protect me.
Right.
But then at midnight, that exact same voice beats me up for being too quiet. I mean, it is a totally rigged game.
It's completely rigged. Right. And that rigged game is exactly what creates a psychological negative spiral. See, your mind relies on these well-worn neural pathways. Over years and years of avoiding discomfort, your brain has basically learned to use harsh self-criticism as its primary defense mechanism.
Okay.
Because of that closed neurological loop, a tiny event like, say, mispronouncing a word in a meeting or finding a typo in an email, it never stays tiny.
It snowballs.
Exactly. The bully takes the data point and spirals it. So, you made a typo, escalates into you are careless, which then becomes people think you're a joke, which finally lands on you will never succeed in this career.
Oh, wow. So one dropped syllable and suddenly your entire professional identity is on trial.
Yeah. And the cognitive load of defending yourself against those daily trials is just staggering. This is actually why people feel so heavily fatigued at the end of the day. You aren't physically exhausted from sitting in a meeting or studying English vocabulary. You are drained from the invisible, relentless friction of fighting your own mind.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, it raises a really fundamental question. If the toll is that high, why does our brain keep amplifying a voice that causes us so much misery? If it's exhausting us, why do we keep listening to it?
Well, we have to look at the mechanical wiring in the brain to understand that. The source introduces an incredibly useful concept here. The mind's algorithm.
The algorithm.
Yeah. In neurological terms, we're talking about the reticular activating system, or the RAS. It's a bundle of nerves at our brainstem that essentially filters out unnecessary information so the important stuff can get through.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, it works exactly like the algorithm on a social media app.
Precisely.
Like if I open an app and I watch 3 videos in a row about restoring old furniture, the app takes note. It says, okay, this user really values furniture restoration, and suddenly my entire feed is just flooded with woodworking videos.
That is the exact mechanism. The app feeds you what you focus on. And your brain's RAS functions the exact same way. The thoughts you repeat to yourself actually act as the programming instructions for your biological filter.
Oh no. So if my inner group chat is constantly spamming messages like I'm incompetent or my English isn't good enough for this job, I am essentially clicking the like button on a negative post. I am actively training my brain's algorithm to serve me more of my flaws.
You're telling your brain that your inadequacy is the single most important data point to track. So your brain will obediently go out into the real world and collect proof to validate that belief.
Just looking for evidence.
Exactly. It will completely ignore the 10 people who smiled during your presentation, and it will laser focus on the one person who checked their watch. It will highlight how polished your colleague sounded just to prove your internal narrative correct. In psychology, we call this confirmation bias.
That is genuinely terrifying. I mean, it means this isn't just about having a bad attitude. It's an active biological filter that actively blinds you to your own successes. The algorithm is ruthlessly curating a file of your failures.
And when that algorithm runs completely unchecked, the result is what the source describes as severe overwhelm. Your mental bandwidth becomes so clogged with negative data points that the simplest tasks, like sending a brief update email, feel monumental. You just freeze.
But the flip side of this, and I think this is vital for our listeners to hear, is that algorithms are just sets of instructions. They aren't permanent laws of physics, right? If my brain is running a negative algorithm, that means it is trainable. Like we're talking about neuroplasticity. The brain can be updated with new data.
Yes. That realization is the absolute pivot point for real change. Once you understand that you are caught in a pattern of biased data collection, you can consciously choose to introduce different data.
Okay, but knowing how that works, my immediate instinct is to just go in and smash the algorithm. Like find the bully in the group chat and banish it. I want to tell myself, stop having negative thoughts, just ban the anxiety.
Which makes sense logically, but attempting to suppress a thought is actually one of the most counterproductive things you can do. Psychologists refer to this as the ironic rebound effect.
The ironic rebound effect. Okay, what is it?
Well, if I tell you right now, under absolutely no circumstances are you allowed to think about a pink elephant, what immediately talks into your mind?
A giant pink elephant.
Right. The more energy you spend trying to block the bully, the more cognitive significance you give it. You cannot just throw the bully out of the chat. Instead, you have to actively hire the coach. You have to introduce a calm, objective voice into the ecosystem to balance out the narrative.
And the source shares a brilliant real-world story to illustrate what that shift actually looks like in practice. The presenter talks about teaching their very first massive English class right after finishing their studies, and the stakes felt impossibly high.
Oh, it's the ultimate vulnerability test. Standing up in front of a room of people looking to you for answers.
Yeah. And the presenter openly admits that the class did not go smoothly. They were physically shaking from nerves, they completely lost their train of thought, and at one point, a student actually raised their hand in the middle of the lesson and corrected the teacher's pronunciation.
Which is pretty much the nightmare scenario for anyone standing at a podium.
Yeah.
The fear literally materializes right in front of you.
It materialized perfectly. And when the presenter went home that night, the bully immediately seized the microphone. It said, "See? You are an imposter. You are a terrible teacher, and you will never be good enough to do this. You need to quit."
And the danger is, if you accept that narrative, if you feed that specific conclusion into your algorithm, you're done. Your progress dies right there. You never step foot in a classroom or a boardroom again.
But the presenter applied the concept of the inner coach. A few days later, they sat down and intentionally asked, "If I were treating myself like I treat my own students, what would I say?" And the coach looked at the exact same embarrassing event, but offered a completely different interpretation.
Right.
The coach said, "Okay, your lesson was not perfect. You stumbled. But you showed up. You stood in front of that room, and that takes bravery. Next time, remember to breathe, bring extra examples, and just learn to laugh when you stumble."
It completely changes the takeaway.
It does, but here's where it gets really interesting, and I'm going to push back here because I know exactly what someone listening to this might be thinking. When you are deeply humiliated, like your boss dresses you down in a meeting or a client corrects you in public, the bully is screaming at a volume of 10. Finding a calm, sweet inner coach in that moment feels not just difficult, but honestly completely impossible.
Sure.
Isn't this just a form of toxic positivity? Like, are we just supposed to feed ourselves delusions and pretend we are perfect when we actually failed?
That skepticism is incredibly common, and it's a crucial distinction we need to make. Toxic positivity is fundamentally a form of denial. It tells you that house isn't on fire while the flames are literally licking the ceiling. It demands that you feel good about everything all the time. The inner coach does not do that.
Yeah.
The coach operates on objective truth, but it delivers that truth with clarity instead of cruelty.
So it doesn't deny the failure.
Not at all. The coach acknowledges the reality. It says, "Ouch, that was a bad presentation. You clearly didn't prepare enough, and that felt really embarrassing." It validates the pain, but then it makes a vital separation. It focuses on the action rather than attacking the identity.
Ah, I see the difference. The bully says, "You gave a bad presentation because you are inherently stupid and worthless." It attacks the core of who you are. The coach says, "You gave a bad presentation. Let's look at the mechanics of why that happened." It creates space between the person and the event.
Yes, space is everything. This is what the source refers to as a light bulb moment. You realize that you do not have to achieve absolute perfection before you deserve basic respect from yourself. You can maintain a baseline of kindness while you are actively growing and fixing your flaws. The idea that we need to viciously beat ourselves up to stay motivated is just a neurological myth.
Understanding that conceptually is super powerful. But moving from theory to practice is where the real work happens. If rewiring the brain is, as you said, difficult biological work, how do we actually change this algorithm day to day? How do we build up this coach's voice in a practical way?
The source outlines a really actionable framework for this. It provides 3 specific, small daily habits designed to slowly reprogram the mind's group chat. And these habits are strategically tied to the 3 times of day when our mental filter is most vulnerable to outside programming.
Okay, let's go through them. Habit number 1 targets the morning. And this is all about the first few minutes of consciousness. Now, for the vast majority of us, the very first action of the day is reaching over, grabbing the smartphone, and immediately absorbing the chaos of the world.
Yep. We read the news, we check work emails, we scroll through social media.
Guilty is charged.
We all do it. But by doing that, you're allowing the external environment to program your reticular activating system for the day. You are essentially handing the remote control of your focus over to whatever algorithms are running on your phone. You start your day purely in a state of reaction.
So the counter habit to this is incredibly simple, but it requires a lot of discipline. Before you touch a screen, before you absorb anyone else's problems, you dictate the trajectory of your own day. You take just 10 seconds and you say a single intentional sentence to yourself.
One sentence.
Yeah. It could be, today I will speak to myself like a supportive colleague, or today I will notice one thing I do well.
And while it feels like a really small gesture from a neurological standpoint, you are giving your mental algorithm its first piece of intentional data. You are priming the filter to look for evidence of support, rather than letting it scavenge for anxiety. You take the driver's seat.
I love that. Which sets the stage for habit number 2. The source calls this the heat of the moment. This happens right in the middle of the day when things go wrong. A client gets angry, you send an email with a glaring error, and you feel that hot, visceral flash of panic.
The bully seizes control of the chat.
Right. And the source used an analogy here about a radio saying you can't always control the first song that plays, but you can change the station to the coach. But frankly, I struggle with that one. Changing a radio station is effortless. Overriding a full-blown anxiety attack does not feel effortless. It feels way more like trying to carve a new path through a dense, overgrown forest.
And that is a far more accurate representation of neuroplasticity, honestly. In neuroscience, there's a principle known as Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together wire together. Because you have listened to the bully for years, that neural pathway is a perfectly paved, multi-lane highway. Your brain defaults to it instantly because there's absolutely no resistance.
Right, it's just easy.
The coach's pathway, on the other hand, is completely overgrown with thorns and weeds. You haven't walked it yet.
So in the heat of the moment, the habit is to just force a pause. You don't send the angry text. You don't verbally put yourself down out loud. You just stop. And in that pause, you ask 2 questions. What is the bully saying right now? And what would the coach say?
That pause is you standing at the fork in the forest with a machete. Asking those 2 questions is the exhausting, manual labor of hacking away the weeds to carve a new route. The first 100 times you do it, it requires immense effort. You have to actively choose not to go down the paved highway of self-loathing.
But over time,
With repetition, the coach's path becomes clearer, and the bully's highway starts to actually decay from lack of use.
you are literally remodeling your brain's infrastructure. Which brings us to the final habit, habit number 3. This happens at bedtime. We discussed earlier how the brain defaults to the midnight review, right? Obsessing over mistakes before sleep.
Yeah, and that nighttime rumination is the equivalent of handing your brain a failing report card right before it begins its memory consolidation process during sleep. You are cementing the negative data into your long-term storage.
To disrupt this, the bedtime habit is to physically write down 3 tiny things you did correctly that day. And the emphasis really is on tiny. You don't need to have, like, cured a disease or closed $1 million deal. You write down, I finally sent that difficult email, or I took 5 minutes to stretch, or I spoke up in the design meeting.
You are manually hacking your confirmation bias. By forcing your brain to scan the previous 12 hours for positive data points, you are training the algorithm to recognize progress. You're feeding the internal system evidence of your competence, which completely neutralizes that midnight review.
It is an active rebellion against the brain's negativity bias. And when you look at all three of these habits together, the morning intention, the machete pause in the moment, and the bedtime data collection, it reframes your entire relationship with failure.
Because ultimately, the objective here is not to eradicate negative emotions entirely. It's not to become some unfeeling machine devoid of fear or doubt. The goal is cognitive resilience.
Cognitive resilience.
Yeah. When you attempt something difficult, whether that's learning English, leading a new team, or just surviving a really hard week, the fear will always be there. The bully will always try to speak. But by actively building the coach's neural pathway, you prove to yourself that a mistake is simply a temporary event to analyze, not a permanent definition of your character.
It's so true. We spend so much energy optimizing our workflows, reading about productivity hacks, and upgrading our technology, but we so rarely take the time to optimize the infrastructure of the voice that is narrating our actual lives.
It is the single most consequential conversation you engage in, precisely because you can never ever walk away from it.
Which means the most important data you collect is happening right now. We just talked about how your mind's algorithm is constantly observing you. It's sitting there quietly taking notes on how you process information, gathering the raw material to build tomorrow's mindset. So knowing how much power that filter holds over your reality, what is the very next thought you're going to choose to feed it the second this deep dive ends?